What's up guys, Nils here and welcome back to another video for today. So a couple of hours ago we went over Ace and how it stands in comparison with other passives, which by the way, even bigger of a disappointment than I expected it to be. It is really horrible. But anyway, since we're on the passives topic, we might as well drop a complete passives tier list. And let me just pull it up real quick. And let's just begin here from the S plus tier on the top. First of all, we have Solid Gold, definitely an S plus passive. Now, I am briefly gonna go through every single one of them. I won't really explain much, especially on the older passives. I will talk about a bit about the new passives, but that's pretty much about it. So this is gonna be a tier list speedrun, and there we go. Solid Gold, 75% increased damage, and the thing that makes Solid Gold really that great is the plus 0.4 yen multiplier that it adds per fighter that has the Solid Gold, and basically what allows us to farm very high amounts of yen. Now, while this sounds great, like 75% damage and increased yen, that comes with drawbacks. You have 20% slower attack speed and you have 25% slower movement speed. Now, 25% slower movement speed is not really that big of a deal and it's barely noticeable, so it's not that big of a drawback, but you lose a little bit damage on the attack speed. And on top of that, if you find a Solid Gold that you don't really need, it has a 50 times more yen sell value than your normal unit, so that's also pretty cool. It's obviously very rare, at 0.13% chance to trigger that passive, and I marked it with an asterisk because its value is great and it's definitely one of the best, if not the best passive all around in the game to go for. However, in terms of pure damage, it's probably the fourth best passive, I believe, in the game. So all things considered, all around, it is the best. Pure damage, not the best. Next up, we have Ghostly, which is the king of damage passives. Now, Ghostly was buffed since it was released, I think 3 updates ago. It was released on a much weaker version of it. Now it does 50% increased damage and 50% increased attack speed, while basically having a permanent speed hack equipped, running at 10 times movement speed. Now, Ghostly does the most amount of damage in game out of any passives overall value. And what is really great about it is that, like, the movement speed, you just zoom around the entire room and you're most likely gonna be casting an ability, an ultimate on a unit before your entire team reaches that, which is pretty cool. And here's the cool thing about Ghostly, right? A lot of people I hear about, they always talk about Ghostly and they're all the time like, oh, I want Ghostly on my 7-hit unit and my 8-hit unit just to make it attack faster. But here's the cool part, right? Let's say that you have Ghostly on a Mewtwo. Mewtwo is a 3-hit unit, very fast. So imagine that you have Ghostly, right? By the time your units get to the mob that you're gonna send your Mewtwo at, Mewtwo will have already casted one ultimate, which is absolutely great, and I think it complements any fighter regarding of a number of hits to charge up their ultimate. It's also one of the rarest passives in the game at 0.13% rarity. Next up, we have Collector 3, another passive that I have marked with an asterisk. Now, this may come to you as a surprise, but I definitely think Collector 3 is an S plus passive because the way that the meta of the game has evolved with the last 2 updates, you need to have a team of Collector 3s. If you don't have a team of Collector 3s, and I am not joking when I talk about it, you are gonna progress the game 10 times slower. Like, first of all, with addition of time trial shop 3 updates ago and 2 updates ago with the max opens, it is insane how valuable having Collector 3 units to farm time trial shards is, because max opens are literally gonna speed up your game progress by 10 times. That's how valuable, how broken max opens are. I've talked about them in the past, but if you don't have a Collector 3 team, please go out and get one. It will do wonders for you. Also, don't be afraid to throw a little bit of leveling into them to make them stronger, because the game is literally all about max opens right now and time trial shards in general. So Collector 3 is a must-have, and I would go ahead and dare say that as far as it comes for passive and valuable, I would say that Collector is more valuable than Solid Gold. Now that would mean solid gold on bad units, which you just swap to kill enemies. I don't talk about solid gold on a good unit. Solid gold on a good unit is the best passive in the game because you have basically both the damage component, which is very strong. It's not the best, but it's very respectable, and you have the yen at the entire time because your strong unit is out all the time and it does crap tons of damage as well. But Collector 3, insane value. Go ahead and get a team, guys. It will do wonders for you. Next up, we are moving on to the S tier and starting on with Tactical 3, which is probably my favorite passive in the game, and I have a whole bunch of these as well. Now, Tactical 3 increases our damage by 100% against bosses only. So when you're attacking boss units only, you're gonna do twice as much damage as you would normally do. It is an insane passive, and when it comes to strictly killing bosses and attacking one target, Tactical 3 does the highest amount of damage in the game. Ghostly has a little bit better value than Tactical 3 simply to the fact that you also have minions to attack, and it's not just bosses on every time trial room, and you also have to run around between each mob, so the 10 times movement speed really adds one attack there, one attack here, and all of that just adds up in the end to total damage. But when we're talking about boss only and raw damage, Tactical 3 is the absolute king. 0.46% chance to get it as well, so not as bad as a mythical, and it's definitely a lot more approachable to get one. Next up, we have Blessing. Blessing is another mythical passive, one of the OG mythical passives in the game. 75% damage multiplier and 150% extra movement speed. So the damage multiplier is basically as much as a solid gold. However, instead of having drawbacks on movement and attack speed, instead you have a lot more movement speed, which means that your fighter is going to get faster to the boss and he's going to get in 1 or 2 more hits before the rest of your team goes. So in that sense, that movement speed is also a slight damage increase. And its rarity is obviously mythical, but it's a little bit easier to get than the other mythicals at 0.19% chance. Now, next up, another passive that I have marked with asterisk, and I was gonna say I believe, but trust me when I tell you, it is the most underrated passive in the game. People are really sleeping on Genius. I feel like they don't really show it as much respect as they should. So Genius basically, as you can clearly see, 50% faster leveling, which is absolutely mind-blowing, right? We have established a long time ago that leveling is the biggest source of damage increase, and what is a better way than leveling your fighters 50% faster? So you know that every single update you sort of have some breakpoints as to how far you can manually level a unit before incubating it. Right now we're on slime update, so I would say everybody can level a fighter to level 190 right now. A little bit of intermediate players could probably push their best fighters to level 195, and advanced players could pretty much push it to 200, even 201 or 202, although that would take roughly 16 hours for leveling up to 202. But yeah, Genius 3 would essentially cut down all of this process by 50%. It is absolutely an insane passive, and if you get it on your fighter, throw as many levels possible in him before you reroll the passive. Great passive and highly slept on. Next up, we have Leader 3, one of the 2 passives that was introduced with update 16, and I feel like people are also sleeping on Leader 3. Hence why I marked it with an asterisk. Now, the way Leader 3 works, and any type of leader, is it increases the damage of your team. Now, Leader 3 gives us 20% increased team damage. So the best use out of Leader would be having 1, 2, or 3 of your strongest units that are much stronger than other units. And then you would just fill up the rest of the team with these leaders to furthermore buff your strongest units, right? Especially because the way the game is played, you normally have 2 really strong units that come out of the incubator, and the rest of them are not even half as strong in most cases. And quite frankly, when people are starting pushing again for room 120, etc., which I think we're going to start looking at room 120 attempts next update. Maybe it's too early, but I think you can possibly see some attempts, some solid attempts on room 120. I think Leader 3 is going to be the absolute meta, where you're going to have 2 fighters out, your 2 strongest ones that go on the boss, just like people used to do on room 100 runs, and you will have 4 Leader 3s out to furthermore damage your units. So it's definitely the meta on how to play high rooms. And I also had a funny comment actually, where somebody just commented down below, and he's like, so for somebody like me who's lazy and he's only incubating, is not playing the game, Leader 3 is the best thing ever. And yeah, quote unquote, if you have like 1 or 2 or 3 really strong units, Leader is the way to go. Next up, we are going over to the A tier, and we have Giant, a passive that got buffed this update. It was previously 1.55 damage on the multiplier, now it got buffed to 1.65 damage multiplier. We also have a 50% side decrease, and the only drawback to this is 20% movement speed, which is honestly not that bad. 20% movement speed is not that big of a deal, it's completely fine, and it's a great passive, especially after the buffs. It has risen a lot in popularity, as you can see. And basically, if we were to compare it with the tank, you see here, tank does the same damage multiplier, and it used to be the best out of these legendary passives, except for tactical. And however, the problem with tank is that it is really damn slow. Tank has a 50% speed reduction as opposed to Giant with only 20%, and the reason for that is actually the rarity. As you can see, Giant has a 0.79% rarity, while Tank has 1%, so it's slightly more common than Giant. All in all, great passives, both of them. And one tip to counteract sort of the drawback that the tank has, because it's really goddamn slow, is you can always press unequip all, run to the boss of the next room, and then press equip. But that's pretty much it. They're both pretty solid passives, they give a lot of damage, it's just that they're a little bit slower, and primarily tank. Giant is fine, 20% is really not that big of a deal. Next up, we have Sorcerer 3. Another passive that is fairly new. It's a mythical passive that was introduced with Black Clover update, and this is also another passive, just like Giant, that got buffed on this current update. So what Sorcerer ultimately does, it reduces the amount of hits that your unit needs to charge up its ultimate attack. It used to be 3, it got buffed to 4, while having a 20% damage multiplier. However, the passive is still not that great for a mythical passive, it really is not. It's a little bit underwhelming, and the problem with Sorcerer 3 is you must not get this on a unit with low hits. If you get it on a unit that will basically eliminate its attacks to ultimate, it's gonna be very bad. So Sorcerer 3 only works on units with high hit count, and it's still not that great, although a very welcome buff made it a little bit better. But in order to justify its rarity being mythical and at 0.19% chance, it should get probably a little bit more buffed. Next up, we have Tiny, another passive that was buffed on the previous update, and Tiny was basically just an attack speed and a movement speed multiplier earlier on. Now they added a 20% bonus damage on it baseline, then you have 50% attack speed and 5 times more movement speed, while obviously just the name says you have a 40% reduced size, so you're much smaller. It comes at a 0.79% rarity, and quite frankly, it's pretty decent now. It's not bad at all. With a 20% passive damage increase, it's pretty decent. Now, the next one is probably the biggest disappointment out of the entire list, and it's the second passive that was introduced in this update, that goes by the name of Phase. For those of you who watched my video that I dropped 3 hours ago, you saw how disappointing it actually is, and the main reason that I see with Ace is that it really lacks just something else. So Ace gives 100% critical strike chance to all of your attacks, which means that all of your attacks will do double damage, right? However, that being said, we have a baseline of 30% critical strike chance right now, and it's gonna be 35% real soon when people complete their 500 raid milestone challenge. So you're sort of getting only 65 to 70% crit, and if we were to translate that in numbers, right? So I'm gonna try to give you guys the simpler explanation behind this, right? So let's assume that we have 33% crit instead of 30, right? If we were to do 3 attacks that each of them did 10 damage, we would do 1, 2, 3. Now, one of these 3 attacks would normally crit, right? With 33% crit. So we would have done 40 damage. I hope you guys are still following me with this example. So having 3 hits that each do 10 damage and 33% critical strike chance would mean 40 damage. Now, what Ace would do on this is it would basically make each and every ability crit, with attack crit rather, not ability, which would cause our unit to do 60 damage instead of 40. Now, on very short fights where the units or bosses die pretty fast, this 30% does not really stick out, but when you see it on a boss fight on like Room 100 Plus, where the boss fight is dragging out for a really long time and you're gonna have hundreds of hits until the boss dies, this 30% is gonna stick out. So if you were back to go ahead to this reference that I brought out and you compared 40 to 60, that would be a 50% damage increase. Now, the realistic damage increase, because of the RNG that I just mentioned, it would be 55 to 60%, and yeah, it is a very disappointing passive, and I've already expressed there is one very easy way to fix this. Increase the critical strike damage multiplier. Instead of doing 2 times more damage, add a 50% critical damage component on it. So that would mean that an attack that would do 10 damage, it would do 25 instead with Ace. That way, Ace would go all the way from this A tier back up to S tier, I think potentially S+, depending on the tuning. But I think that's a very easy way to fix the passive, and if you have a look at its rarity, it is the rarest passive in the game. Its chances of getting Ace are 0.079, so you will realize that this means that it is twice as rare as a ghostly or solid gold. Next up, we have Strong 3. We are pretty much done with legendary passives except for Sorcerer 2, which we're gonna be looking at later on. Now, Strong 3 gives us a 50% damage increase. It is a very decent passive, it is very respectable, and if you get it early, you should pretty much hold on to it until you have a whole bunch of passives to reroll like multiple times. But all around, it is a pretty decent passive. Next up, we are going down to the B tier, where these passives are kinda not that great anymore. First of all, we have Reach 3. Now, Reach 3 is basically a budget version of Solid Gold, right? Solid Gold is essentially Reach 4 plus the damage component. Now, Reach 3 is a great passive for people that have just started the game, or rather the intermediate stage, where finding solid golds is still pretty hard as they are a little bit rare, so you should try to get a full team of Reach 3s, and ultimately you will transition from Reach to solid golds. You will swap them out one by one, so that's all there is to it. The next one, Tactical 2. Tactical 2 is the baby version of Tactical 3. It gives us 50% bonus damage to bosses. Overall, a great passive. I wouldn't say that this is a B tier passive, I would more like say that this is an A- tier passive. It is a decent passive to keep on until you have a lot of shards to reroll for something better, just like I said about Strong 3. The next one, Genius 2. Very good passive still, 30% faster leveling is not that bad. I would highly suggest that if you hatch a fighter with this, or if you get it on early on rerolls when you are low level, you should keep it for a little bit, level up, and then change it. Sorcerer 2, it is slightly nerfed version of Sorcerer 4. It takes -2 hits to your ultimate and it has a 10% damage multiplier. Nothing great, honestly. It is a below average passive and there's not much to say. Perhaps sorcerers are going to get buffed in the future, but for now they are very underwhelming, all of their rarities. Now, lastly, on the B tier passive, we have Leader 2. I explained how Leader works earlier, and Leader 2 is basically half as strong as Leader 1. It gives 10% team damage. It is still a decent passive to just carry with you if you don't have good supporting units for like your 4th, 5th, 6th slot. So it could be an alternative early on when you're starting out to building a strong team. And lastly, we have the C tier, where these are basically the very last passives that are noteworthy to say, sort of. First of all, we have Speedy. You move very, very fast and you attack a little bit faster. But it is really nothing to be noteworthy here. It is not a good passive. Then we have Collector 3, a weaker version of Collector. Sorcerer 1, it just takes one less hit to charge up your ultimate. It doesn't increase your damage at all. Now Strong 2, 25% damage increase. It's not bad, it's okay-ish, especially for people that are starting early on. And then we have Leader 1 with 5% team damage, Reach 2 with 0.2 yen multiplier event, and Collector 1. The rest of the passives are grey, and quite frankly I think if you get any rare passive, you should reroll it as fast as you can and you shouldn't keep it. Now, one last thing just to close off this video. I get this question asked a lot, and a lot of people ask me, I got this passive, should I have this amount of shards, should I reroll? I would suggest that you should draw a line over at the A tier plus Tactical 2. So if you have Tactical 2 and any passive from A tier or above, you should not instantly reroll. These are decent passives to say, sort of, so you could hold on to them until you gather a lot of shards to do a lot of rerolls, because there is a very high chance that, for example, let's say that you have Shiny Secret or a Divine unit which costs 10 shards, right? Let's say that you have an A tier passive and you have like 40 shards. In just 4 rerolls, there's a very high chance that you are gonna get something worse than what you already have. So if you have Tactical 2 or anything above from the A tier and onwards, you should hold on to it until you have a lot of shards for a lot of rerolls. Anyway guys, that was pretty much it for my passive tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys agree with it or whatever, but for me that's kind of how things are right now. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to click that like, subscribe button down below. Helps me out a lot. And make sure to click the notification bell as well to not miss any of the future uploads. And until the next one, take care.